Welcome back. I have been thinking lately about how the most elegant forms of retribution never announce themselves. They arrive wearing the face of generosity, a hand extended, a resource shared, a door held open with a smile. What distinguishes a merely angry person from a truly dangerous one is the patience to let someone else pull the trigger on themselves. This story is built around a Spotify family plan slot. One extra seat at a digital table, offered without condition. The recipient never considered why it was offered. That was, of course, the entire point. Welcome to Historical Manhwa. Elena Voss heard the rain before she opened her eyes on the second morning of her life. It came through the window of her childhood bedroom in the way it always had, not in sheets, but in individual percussions, each drop striking the copper drainpipe outside with a distinct metallic note, like someone tapping a finger against a hollow coin. She lay still for a long moment, cataloging the sound, letting it confirm what her bones already knew. The smell confirmed it too. Old wood and lavender detergent, and the faint ghost of the bergamot candle her mother kept on the hallway console, even though she never lit it anymore. The weight of the duvet was heavier than anything she had slept under in years. The mattress was too soft. The ceiling above her had a water stain in the shape of a wing or a boot, depending on your mood. She was 23 years old. She was also 31. Since she had been dead for approximately 11 days before whatever mechanism governs such things decided she had unfinished business and sent her back. She pressed her palms flat against the mattress and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, 4 counts each. The way the therapist she had only seen twice had taught her before her startup consumed every hour she had, and the sessions became a luxury she could not justify. She cataloged the room. The childhood desk with the scratched surface from a summer she had tried to teach herself woodworking. The poster on the door, a topographical map of Iceland, that she had bought at a university fair and never gotten around to replacing, even as it yellowed at the corners. The phone on the nightstand, charging with the frayed cable her mother kept meaning to throw away. The phone was old. It was the Samsung she had used at 23. The one with the cracked screen protector she had covered with a piece of clear tape. She picked it up, and the familiar weight of it in her hand made something in her chest close like a fist. The date on the screen was March 14th. March 14th, 8 years before the night in the parking structure on the corner of Weston and Meridian, when she had looked up at the yellow fluorescent light and thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that it was a very ugly light to be the last thing she ever saw. She put the phone down. She put her forearm over her face. She did not cry. Crying was for people who did not know what was coming, and she knew exactly what was coming. Every beat of it, every smile, and every handshake, and every contract signed in good faith by a woman who had not yet understood that faith was the first weapon her enemies would use against her. She had 8 years. She sat up. The first thing she needed to understand was the architecture of her own memory. Because memory she had learned in her previous life from a forensic accountant named Gerald Park, who charged $400 an hour and wore the same gray cardigan to every meeting, is not a filing cabinet. It is a net. The holes matter as much as the fibers. You cannot simply reach in and retrieve a date or a number without also pulling up everything attached to it. The feeling, the weather, the way someone smelled, the quality of the light. Gerald had told her this while explaining how financial fraud was traced, how the deception always lived in the gaps between records, in the things that should have been there and weren't. She had applied this, without meaning to the landscape of her own betrayal. She pulled everything through the net now, lying in the childhood bed with the rain on the drainpipe, and let it arrange itself by weight rather than by chronology. The heaviest thing was Cassidy Holt, not Derek. People assumed, when she told the story in the version of her life that had ended 11 days ago, that Derek was the wound. Derek Nayam, her fiancé of 3 years, who had left her company's board meeting on a Thursday and shown up to a dinner with Cassidy on a Friday, who had moved out of the apartment they shared by the following Monday with a professionalism that suggested the timeline had been mapped in advance. Derek was a bruise. He was the kind of injury that hurts primarily because it tells you something about your own judgment. She had stopped trusting her judgment after Derek in ways she had never fully recovered from in her first life. But Derek had not cost her the company. Derek had not taken what she had built and filed the incorporation paperwork under a different name. and walked into a meeting with Sonata Ventures on a Tuesday in October and presented her algorithm as his and Cassidy's original intellectual property. Derek had simply been the distraction, the decoy. He had occupied her attention for exactly long enough. Cassidy Holt had been her best friend since they were 19. She had the kind of face that invited trust. Open, symmetrical, but with the specific quality of warmth that comes from having been told you are warm since childhood, and having learned to perform it so consistently that it calcified into something indistinguishable from the real thing. They had met in a data science elective that neither of them had needed for their respective degrees. Elena was studying computational linguistics. Cassidy was in communications, which Elena had thought then was a soft degree, and which she thought now, lying in her childhood bed at 23, with 31 years of hindsight, was an absurd judgment. Because communications was the degree that taught you how to make people believe things, and the ability to make people believe things was, it turned out, the only skill that actually mattered. They had been inseparable for 4 years. They had started Audiograph together, or so Elena had believed. What she understood now, as with the cold clarity that only complete information can produce, was that Cassidy had been adjacent to the starting of Audiograph. She had been present. She had contributed early-stage energy and enthusiasm and a network of communications graduates who could talk to press, which Elena had found valuable because Elena found talking to press unbearable. But the algorithm, the proprietary recommendation engine that mapped a listener's behavioral fingerprints across not just genre but tempo variance and skip rate patterns, and the specific correlation between ambient sound tolerance and emotional state that Elena had spent 8 months building and testing on herself, and then on a small group of volunteer users. That had been Elena's, every line of it. The documentation was in her name. The initial patent filing, which she had done herself using a legal self-help platform because they could not yet afford an IP attorney, was in her name. The methodology paper she had published in a computational musicology journal under a pseudonym to protect the proprietary elements was in her voice, her structure, her obsession. Cassidy knew all of this because Elena had told her, because Elena had trusted her. In her first life, Elena had not understood what had happened until 9 months after Cassidy and Derek had presented at Sonata. By then, the funding had been secured. By then, the new company, rechristened Resonance Analytics, had offices in a converted warehouse in the Meridian District, and a team of 12 and a contract with a mid-sized record label who wanted predictive playlist data. By then, the filing that would have established Elena's prior art had been suppressed. Not destroyed, but buried. Routed through a legal process that required her to have resources she did not have. And Cassidy had made sure she did not have them. Cassidy had spoken quietly, in the right rooms, to the right people, about Elena's mental health. Not in a way that was actionable, not in a way that left fingerprints, just in a way that made the investors nervous, just in a way that made the doors close with a soft click, rather than a slam. Elena had known, even then, that Cassidy was good at this. She had watched her do it to other people. She had never thought to apply the observation to herself. She had spent 3 years fighting a legal battle she could not afford with attorneys who kept dropping out when the retainer ran dry, and she had lost. And then she had gotten the settlement offer, which was insultingly small. And she had taken it because she was tired, and she owed money she could not repay, and her mother had just been diagnosed with something that required expensive management. And the night she signed the settlement, she had driven to a bar she had never been to before and sat on a stool and drank gin until her vision softened at the edges and she called a car to take her home. And somewhere between the back seat of that car and the parking structure on the corner of Weston and Meridian, there was a gap in her memory that she had never been able to fill. And then there was the yellow fluorescent light. And then there was the rain on the copper drain pipe. She sat up in the childhood bed. She put her feet on the floor. The floorboards were cold through her socks. She picked up the fraying cable phone and opened the Notes app and began to type, not with urgency, but with the methodical calm of someone who has already processed the rage and come out the other side into something much quieter and much more durable. She typed for 40 minutes while the rain continued outside. She typed without pausing because she did not need to think about what she was writing. She had thought about it for 11 days in whatever space she had been in between the fluorescent light and the drain pipe. She had done nothing else. When she was finished, she read what she had written once. Then she locked the phone, put it on the nightstand, and went to make coffee. Her mother was already in the kitchen, standing at the counter with her back to the door, spooning grounds into the machine with the deliberate attention she gave to small tasks. She was 54. She looked from behind the same as she would look at 62, which was the age she would be when Elena died in the first version of this timeline, except she would have the weight of the medical diagnosis in her posture, and she did not have that yet. Not for another 4 months. Elena looked at the back of her mother's head and felt something she could not categorize move through her like a current, and she sat down at the table and said, "Morning." Her mother turned, and her face did the thing faces do when they register the presence of someone they love, which is a kind of quiet lighting. Not dramatic, not performed. "You were up late," she said. "I was thinking." "You think too loudly, and I could hear you through the wall." "Sorry." Her mother put a mug in front of her and sat down across the table with her own. She looked at Elena in the particular way that mothers look at adult children who have come home after a period of difficulty, not searching exactly, but attending. Elena had come home 2 weeks ago, in this timeline, after her first startup attempt, a much smaller and less developed precursor to Audiograph. Gnome had failed to secure seed funding, and she had come back to regroup, which was a word she had been using with everyone including herself because it was more dignified than what was actually happening, which was that she had run out of money and confidence simultaneously and needed somewhere to sleep that did not cost her anything. She had spent those 2 weeks in her childhood room in a state of low-grade despair that felt, in retrospect, like the specific quality of darkness that precedes a pivot. In her first life, she had used that time to process the failure, restructure, and go back to the algorithm with fresh eyes, and then she had met Cassidy for coffee and told her about the new approach. And Cassidy had been wonderful about it, engaged and incisive and full of the kind of questions that felt like collaboration. And 6 months later, they had incorporated Audiograph together, and you already know the rest. In this life, she was not going to tell Cassidy anything. She was going to use her. This was the distinction she had spent 11 days clarifying. There is a version of this story in which Elena simply avoids Cassidy. Ghosts her. Builds Audiograph alone, files the patents correctly, secures the funding through channels Cassidy cannot access, and watches from a distance while Cassidy's career flatlines without the algorithm to anchor it. And as that version is satisfying in the way that purely preventative actions are satisfying. It protects the protagonist, it denies the antagonist, and it produces a clean outcome. But prevention is not accountability. Prevention lets Cassidy continue believing she is the kind of person who could have done it. It leaves the mechanism intact. It leaves Derek intact. It leaves Sonata Ventures intact, which had known Elena's second life certainty was absolute on this point. That the IP it was buying had not originated with the sellers. Preston Mayle, Sonata's founding partner, had asked a due diligence question in that October meeting that no one would ask unless they already knew the answer they were trying to avoid. He had asked, "Is there any prior work on this methodology that predates your founding?" And Cassidy had said, without blinking, "Nothing material." And Preston had nodded and moved on. Elena had read the deposition transcript 17 times in her first life. She knew that nod. She knew what it meant. She knew that Preston Mayle had insulated himself with plausible deniability while knowingly funding a theft. And she knew that he had done so because the return on resonance analytics was projected to be significant and the alternative, pausing to investigate the IP provenance, was inconvenient. Prevention let Preston Mayle off the hook. Prevention let Derek off the hook. Prevention let Cassidy off the hook and gave her the opportunity to find another algorithm to steal from another person who trusted her, because that was what Cassidy did, and without a consequence, she would continue doing it. Elena poured a second mug of coffee and went back to her room and opened the Notes app. She needed to think about sequence. The thing about revenge, and she was not sentimental about calling it that. One, she did not dress it in the language of justice or accountability or any of the softer words people use when they want to feel dignified, is that it only works if you understand the target's mechanics. Not their psychology in the broad therapeutic sense, their actual operational mechanics, the specific ways they move through the world, the patterns they default to, the habits they protect, the resources they guard. Cassidy Holt, at 23, saw it was in the early stages of building those habits, and she had not yet learned to protect them because she had not yet learned they needed protecting. Elena knew them all. She knew that Cassidy was meticulous about her digital presence in the ways that communications graduates were meticulous. Her social media was carefully curated, her professional profiles were updated. She was early to every new platform because she understood that visibility was its own form of capital. She knew that Cassidy had a specific and documented tendency to over-rely on borrowed resources. She borrowed money she repaid late. She borrowed clothes she returned with minor damage she never acknowledged. She borrowed ideas and called them conversations. She borrowed software licenses and account access without considering that access left records, that records created trails, that trails were a form of testimony. This was the piece Elena had been turning over for 11 days. But in her first life, Cassidy had asked to share Elena's Spotify account sometime in their second year of knowing each other. This was common then. The family plan allowed up to 5 members, and Elena had only been using one slot. She had added Cassidy without thinking much about it. Cassidy had used it for 3 years. And then, in the 8th month after Audiograph launched, when Cassidy was already in the process of building the architecture of her betrayal, Elena's Spotify account had been flagged by Spotify's automated fraud detection system and suspended. At the time, Elena had assumed it was a billing error or a bot detection mistake. She had contacted support, explained that she was the primary account holder, walked through the verification steps, and had her account reinstated within a week. She had never thought to ask what had triggered the flag. She had never connected it to Cassidy. In her second life, she thought about it for a long time. She pulled everything she knew about Spotify's terms of service violation detection, which was, as it turned out, considerable. In her first life, after the settlement, she had taken a consulting role with a digital rights management firm called Nexum Technologies. Partly because they paid well, and partly because the work touched the edges of the music streaming industry in ways that felt relevant to her ongoing legal fight. At Nexum, she had worked with a woman named Dr. Soo-Yin Park, no relation to Gerald, who specialized in streaming platform manipulation and who had explained to her in precise and unsentimental detail exactly how Spotify's anti-fraud algorithms functioned. The system, Dr. Park had explained, was designed to detect several categories of abuse. The most common was stream farming, the use of automated scripts or bots to inflate a song's play count, which affected royalty payouts and chart positions, and was therefore a significant financial concern for the platform. The detection mechanism was not simple. It did not merely count plays. It analyzed behavioral signatures, the pattern of skips, the variation in listening duration, the geographic distribution of plays, the time of day clustering, the ratio of repeat listens to new discoveries, the correlation between device type and listening behavior, the way playlists were navigated. And a human listener had an irregular organic signature. A bot had a regular mechanical one. The system was looking for the uncanny valley between those two profiles. What made it interesting, and what Elena had filed away without knowing she was filing it away, was the edge case Dr. Park had described almost in passing. The system could also flag accounts that were being used to test bot detection evasion. If someone was running an automated script that was trying to mimic organic human listening in order to avoid detection, and if that script was iterating through its parameters, testing different skip rates, different time intervals, different playlist navigation patterns. The iteration itself created a signature. The signature of something trying not to look like what it was. And that signature, Dr. Park had said, was actually easier to detect than a simple bot. All because organic variation was not perfectly random either. Human listeners had preferences, moods, habits. They were irregular in consistent ways. Something pretending to be irregular was irregular in inconsistent ways, and the system could tell the difference. Elena knew, with the certainty of complete information, what Cassidy had been doing on her Spotify account in the 8th month after Audiograph launched. She had been testing her stolen algorithm. Audiograph's recommendation engine was built on behavioral fingerprinting, to refine it, to calibrate it, to make it perform in ways that would impress investors and withstand technical scrutiny. You needed to run it against real listening data, under real conditions, on a real account. And you needed to simulate the patterns the algorithm would produce when it was operating at scale, which meant you needed to run automated listening sequences through an account to generate the kind of data the engine could then analyze and respond to. Cassidy did not have a clean account she wanted to risk. She used Elena's. The automated sequences she ran looked, to Spotify's detection system, exactly like the signature Dr. Park had described. The signature of evasion. The system had flagged Elena's account, suspended it, and sent the notification. Elena had dealt with the support ticket without ever knowing what had actually happened. And Cassidy had continued using the account after reinstatement, because Elena had never thought to remove her. In this life, Elena was going to be very deliberate about when she added Cassidy to the family plan, and about what conditions she arranged beforehand. She spent the first 3 months doing nothing that looked like preparation. She was 23, she had come home after a startup failure, she was regrouping, she got a part-time data analysis contract with a local consulting firm that paid enough to cover her personal expenses and gave her reasons to be at a computer for long stretches of time without anyone wondering what she was doing. She went to the gym her mother's neighbor had a guest pass to. She had dinner with her mother on Thursdays. She read, she attended a computational musicology conference in April and sat in the back and listened and said very little and watched the room. She did not contact Cassidy. Cassidy contacted her in late April because Cassidy always contacted her. This was part of the mechanics. Cassidy had a finely calibrated sense of when people in her network were becoming relevant again. Elena's startup failure had dropped her temporarily below the threshold of usefulness, but the conference, which had a public attendee list, had raised it. Cassidy sent a message that was warm, specific, and perfectly pitched. She mentioned the conference by name, said she had thought of Elena when she saw the program, asked how the regrouping was going, suggested coffee. Elena read the message. She waited 48 hours. She replied, "Sure, Tuesday works." They met at the coffee place near the transit hub, which was Cassidy's preference because it was midway between her apartment and the university district, where she still had contacts. It had exposed brick walls and industrial pendant lighting, and served coffee in glasses that were too small and food on boards that were too large, and the music was always something mid-tempo and indistinct that Elena had always found mildly irritating. She got there first and chose a table near the window and ordered an Americano she did not want and watched the door. Cassidy came in wearing a yellow dress and a linen blazer and looking the way she always looked, which was put together in a way that appeared effortless because she had spent time on it. She saw Elena immediately, and her face did the lighting thing, the genuine-seeming lighting thing, and she crossed the room with her arms slightly open and embraced Elena with the specific quality of warmth she deployed for people she wanted something from. Elena hugged her back. She noted the bergamot in her perfume. She noted the slight tension in Cassidy's shoulders that wasn't tension from nervousness, but tension from the sustained performance of warmth. "You look good," Cassidy said, sitting down. "So do you. How was the conference?" "When I saw the program, the panel on behavioral acoustic mapping looked fascinating." "It was interesting." Elena wrapped her hands around the too small glass. "A lot of theoretical work still looking for practical application." Cassidy leaned forward slightly. "That's the gap, right? That's always the gap. The theorists don't know how to build, and the builders don't know how to theorize." Are you working on something? Still the recommendation engine concept?" Elena looked at her. Let the pause sit for exactly 1 beat longer than comfortable. Slowly. "I'm being more careful about the architecture this time. The first attempt had some structural weaknesses." "In the algorithm?" "In the whole framework. IP documentation, data governance, the unsexy stuff." Cassidy nodded, and something moved behind her eyes that Elena recognized now as calculation. "That stuff matters so much more than people think early on. I feel like everyone learns it the hard way." "Yeah," Elena said. "What do you do?" They talked for an hour and a half. Elena told Cassidy almost nothing true. She described a direction she was not pursuing, framed in language that was technically accurate, but pointed entirely away from Audiograph's real architecture. She expressed the kind of uncertainty that Cassidy would read as vulnerability, which would make her feel comfortable, which would make her feel in control of the dynamic. She asked about Cassidy's work with the careful interest of someone who considered another person a peer, which was what Cassidy needed from her. When they hugged goodbye outside, Cassidy said, "This was so good. Let's not let it be so long next time." "Definitely," Elena said. She walked to the transit stop and stood in the spring sun and felt absolutely nothing. She spent the next 8 months building audiograph correctly. Not carefully. She had been careful the first time. And careful was not the same as correct. Correctly meant understanding that the most important architectural decisions were not technical but legal. She engaged an IP attorney named Rahul Singh, who was 6 years into private practice and had a small office above a dry cleaner on Vantage Street. And she paid him with the consulting income and explained in meticulous detail exactly what she was building and why the documentation needed to be bulletproof. Rahul had the quality she valued in technical experts, which was the quality of telling her when she was wrong without making it feel like a verdict. He told her that the self-filed patent from her first life had 3 structural weaknesses that would have made it vulnerable to a well-funded challenge. He told her how to address them. She addressed them. She published a methodology paper in the journal where she had published the pseudonymous one in her first life. Except this time, she did not use a pseudonym, and she registered the D.O. against her legal name, and she uploaded the full version with the original time-stamped drafts to a repository that cross-referenced the patent application. She created, in other words, a paper trail that was not merely a record, but a weapon. Something that existed in enough places and under enough verification that removing it would require a coordinated effort that would itself leave evidence. She incorporated Audiograph LLC in November, with herself as sole founder and primary IP holder. The incorporation documents named Cassidy Holt as a prospective operations advisor with a clearly defined scope of work: communications, PR, media relations, and a clearly defined limitation. The limitation, which Rahul had drafted with the care of someone who had seen this specific category of dispute before, stated that none of the advisory relationship was to be construed as co-authorship of or claim upon the underlying algorithm, which was defined in an attached exhibit that ran to 43 pages. Cassidy had not yet seen these documents. She would when Elena invited her in. And when she signed them, she would be signing away the avenue of attack before she understood she would ever want it. This was the first layer. The second layer required Elena to understand something about Cassidy's current situation that she had not thought to understand in her first life because she had been too close to it. Cassidy, at 23 going on 24, was building a reputation in the communications space around the music industry. She had done a few pieces for an independent music blog. She had some social media presence around playlist culture. She was not financially comfortable. Her parents helped her with rent. She had approximately $18,000 in a savings account, a number Elena knew from a conversation in their 3rd year of friendship when Cassidy had mentioned it while discussing whether to invest in a friend's restaurant. What Cassidy wanted at this specific point in her life was access. Access to industry, to funding networks, to the kind of rooms where early-stage companies got built into something. She wanted this access the way people want things they do not yet have the language for. She had not decided what she was going to do with it once she had it. She was still in the phase of accumulation. Elena was going to give it to her, carefully, in doses, in a way that made her feel like a collaborator in something real, which would motivate her to bring her full capabilities to bear, most including the ones Elena needed to see performed in controlled conditions where they could be observed and documented. Because the thing about Cassidy that Elena understood, now that she had not understood at 23, was that she needed to be seen doing it. She was meticulous enough to cover her tracks eventually, but she was not meticulous at the start. At the start, she was enthusiastic, and she moved quickly, and she did not yet understand the value of slowness. Plus, she would use Elena's resources the way she always used borrowed things, without thinking about what the use revealed. The Spotify account was a small piece of this. But small pieces, arranged in the right sequence, make a pattern, and a pattern, properly documented, is admissible. She added Cassidy to the Spotify family plan in February, 14 months after the first coffee meeting, and 6 months after she had formally invited Cassidy into Audiograph's communications structure. By then, Cassidy had signed the advisory agreement. By then, she had done enough good work on the PR side. 2 podcast appearances, a feature in a music tech newsletter, an introduction to a journalist who had written a genuinely useful profile, that Elena had given her more access, more information, more of the shape of what was being built. By then, Cassidy knew enough about the algorithm to understand its potential. Elena had watched her understand it. Or she had watched the understanding change the quality of Cassidy's attention in the specific way she was watching for a sharpening, a certain kind of private calculation behind the performed enthusiasm. She had watched Cassidy start to look at Derek Naum, who was by this point Elena's boyfriend of 5 months and not yet her fiancé, with the specific quality of interest that Elena now recognized as reconnaissance. She had watched all of this and said nothing and changed nothing and continued to build. The Spotify invite arrived in Cassidy's inbox on a Wednesday morning. Elena had sent it from her personal account rather than the company email, which was deliberate. She accompanied it with a message that said, "Finally getting around to clearing out my family plan. You mentioned you were paying for a solo sub. Take a slot if you want it." Cassidy replied within 4 minutes, "Oh my god, thank you. I've been meaning to cancel mine." She accepted the invitation within the hour. Elena opened her laptop and navigated to her Spotify account management page and confirmed that Cassidy was now the 4th member of the family plan. Then she opened a different window, the one she had been maintaining for 8 months, the private folder in a cloud storage account that was not connected to any of her professional profiles, and she updated a document. The document was a time-stamped log of Cassidy's activities, assembled from sources that were entirely legitimate. Public social media posts. Messages Cassidy had sent to the Audiograph Communications channel, which was a professional work channel and therefore subject to standard data retention policies. The notes from their coffee meetings, which Elena had been writing immediately after each meeting since April of the previous year. The advisory agreement and all its amendments. Or the scope of work emails, the introductions Cassidy had made on Audiograph's behalf, documented with dates and outcomes, the introduction she had made to Derek, documented with the specific framing she had used. "You should really meet my friend Elena. She's building something that would interest you," which Elena had noted because Cassidy had described her as her friend before she described her as someone building something, which was a specific sequence, which was a tell. She added a new entry, Cassidy Holt added to Spotify family plan. Account ID. Timestamp need timestamp. Plan details. 5-member family plan, primary account holder. E. Voss, account in good standing with standard usage history. She saved the document, she made a backup to a separate cloud account. She closed the laptop and went to the kitchen to make dinner, and the rain, which had come back after a week's absence, started again on the copper drainpipe outside. The thing Elena had not counted on, or rather, the thing she had counted on but had not been certain of, because certainty requires evidence and she had only had inference, was the speed. Cassidy began using the account that same evening. Elena could see the listening activity from the family plan management dashboard. She could see what Cassidy was playing and on what device, and how long each session lasted, and what her skip patterns looked like. This was standard family plan visibility. The account holder could monitor usage of all member accounts. She had not told Cassidy this. She had not lied about it either. It was in the terms of service. Cassidy had not read the terms of service. Cassidy had not, in Elena's experience, read the terms of service of anything in her life. The first 2 weeks were organic. Cassidy listened to exactly the kind of music she had always listened to. She had Catholic and slightly performative taste, the kind that covered enough ground to be interesting in conversation without being so niche as to be alienating. Indie pop, some jazz, some hip-hop, some electronic. She saved songs to playlists with names like Late Night Driving and Sunday Mood. The skip patterns were irregular in the organic way. The session lengths varied. It looked like a person listening to music. In the 3rd week, the character of the listening changed. Elena noticed it on a Tuesday morning when she checked the dashboard over her first coffee. Cassidy had run a 3-hour session between 2 and 5 a.m. The session had played through 47 songs. The skip pattern was uniform. Each song had been played for between 45 and 60 seconds before being skipped. The playlist navigation had followed a specific path, Song 1 to Song 2 to Song 3 in exact sequential order, which was not how humans navigated playlists. Which was how automated scripts navigated playlists. The device listed was a desktop computer. Elena put her coffee down. She took a screenshot of the dashboard. She uploaded it to the private folder with a timestamp. She made a note. The sessions continued. They came in clusters. 3 or 4 hours at a stretch, always late at night or early in the morning, always with the same mechanical skip pattern, always sequential. The device never changed. In the 6th week, once a second pattern appeared alongside the first, a different skip rate, different timing intervals, as if someone had adjusted the parameters and was running a comparison. This was exactly what Dr. Park had described, the signature of iteration, someone testing. In the 8th week, Elena received the email from Spotify. "Your account has been flagged for activity that may violate our terms of service," the email said. "Our systems have detected patterns consistent with automated or bot activity. As a precautionary measure, your account access has been temporarily restricted. Please contact our support team to verify your account and resolve this issue." She read the email twice. She did not contact support. She opened the private folder and updated the log. Then she opened a separate document she had been preparing for 3 months. It was addressed to the Fraud and IP Compliance Division of Spotify's legal department, and it contained a detailed account of the following: her account history, the addition of Cassidy Holt as a family plan member on date, the specific activity pattern she had documented in the weeks following the addition, her professional background in digital rights management, and a technical analysis. Written by her and reviewed by Dr. Soo-Yin Park, one who she had contacted 3 months earlier under the pretext of an industry consultation, of why the detected patterns were consistent with a streaming manipulation algorithm being tested in a real-time environment rather than a sandbox. The letter did not accuse Cassidy Holt of anything by name. It presented observed facts. It made the technical interpretation available to people with the expertise to evaluate it. It attached the timestamped screenshots. It attached Dr. Park's review. It attached the documentation of Elena's advisory agreement with Cassidy, which established Cassidy's access to and knowledge of the behavioral fingerprinting algorithm, which was the methodology whose signature was visible in the automated sessions. It closed with a request. Please preserve all account access logs and usage data associated with account ID for the period of date range. This data may be relevant to an IP dispute proceeding. She sent the letter to Spotify's legal compliance department. She sent a copy to Rahul Singh with a note that said, "For the file." Then she called Spotify support and began the account reinstatement process, which she expected to complete within a week. What happened next happened in 3 layers, which Elena had planned for, and 1 layer she had not, which was the layer that made everything else possible. The first layer was Spotify. The account was reinstated on the 7th day. Such to the compliance letter, which had been logged and escalated and reviewed by a member of the platform integrity team named, she would learn later, Marcus Trent, had resulted in the access logs and usage data being preserved as requested. This was not a guarantee of anything. It was a record. Records were the raw material of every subsequent action. She removed Cassidy from the family plan on the 8th day. She sent a message to Cassidy that said, "Hey, Spotify flagged my account for unusual activity, and I had to go through a whole verification process, cleaning up the plan for a bit while they review. I'll re-add you once everything's settled." Cassidy replied within an hour. "Oh no, that's such a pain. Hope it gets sorted." She sent a small emoji that was a musical note. Elena read the reply and thought, there it is. There was no alarm in the message, no guilt. No question about whether the unusual activity could have been related to her usage. No offer of explanation, just the smooth surface of someone who knows how to perform unconcerned. She added a note to the log. Cassidy's response to account suspension notification. No acknowledgement of potential connection to her own usage, consistent with awareness of the activity and deliberate misdirection. The second layer was Cassidy herself. Elena had anticipated that the account suspension would accelerate Cassidy's timeline. She was right. In the week after the message, Cassidy's behavior in the audiograph communications channel changed in a specific way. She became more active, more probing, more interested in the technical infrastructure details that fell outside her communications advisory scope. She asked questions in the channel that were framed as curiosity, but that Elena recognized as due diligence. That she made a suggestion in their weekly check-in that they bring in a technical co-founder to help manage the engineering side, which Elena had heard before and which had a specific function. Co-founder status came with equity, and equity came with IP claims, and a technical co-founder brought in by Cassidy would be someone Cassidy could influence. Elena declined calmly and explained that Audiograph's engineering was outsourced and did not require a co-founder structure at this stage. Cassidy did not push. She moved on. But she did not abandon the direction. 2 weeks later, she suggested bringing Derek Naum to a networking event as a +1. He was, she said, working in tech investment and might have useful contacts. Elena said sure. She watched Cassidy watch Derek watch Elena for the entire 3 hours of that event, and she watched Derek do what he did, which was to be charming and attentive in the way that men who have been carefully briefed about a target are charming and attentive, and she thought, 6 months, maybe 7, before he makes his move. She had time. She used the time to do something she had not done in her first life, because in her first life she had not known to do it. She hired a digital forensics consultant, not Dr. Park, who was too close to the Spotify situation and whose role she wanted to keep narrow and clean. Then she hired a different firm, a small outfit in the city called Veritas Digital Forensics, run by a former FTC compliance officer named James Osei, who had the careful bearing of someone who had spent a long time in rooms where the cost of imprecision was very high. She retained Veritas on a monthly basis, framed as ongoing IP monitoring for a music tech startup, which was accurate. And so she asked James to do the following: monitor for any algorithm or methodology published or filed by any entity that shared structural characteristics with Audiograph's documented engine. Monitor for any new company and corporations in the music tech space, involving either Cassidy Holt or Derek Naum. Monitor the patent landscape in behavioral audio recommendation for new filings. Run a quarterly analysis. James billed her $1,800 a month. She paid it from the consulting income and, as the company grew, from Audiograph's operating budget under a line item called IP Protection Services. She was building a net. Derek made his move in month 7, which was 6 days earlier than she had predicted, which told her Cassidy's timeline was slightly compressed. He arrived in her professional life with the cover story of investment interest. He had heard about Audiograph from a mutual contact. The mutual contact was Cassidy, and the contact had not been made casually, and wanted to understand what they were building. Elena met him for coffee. She was professional and warm, and showed him exactly what she would have shown any prospective investor at this stage: enough to be interesting, not enough to be informative. She let him believe the meeting had gone well. They had 3 more meetings over the following 2 months. He asked to see a technical overview. She provided one that was accurate in structure and intentionally incomplete in detail. It described the algorithm's inputs and outputs without describing the mechanism that connected them, which was the mechanism that had value. She had asked Rahul to review the document first and confirm it disclosed nothing protectable. It disclosed nothing protectable. At the 4th meeting, Derek said, very carefully, that he had a contact at a VC firm who might be interested in a conversation. So the firm was Sonata Ventures. Elena kept her face neutral. She said she would think about it. She thought about it for 48 hours and then called Rahul. She told him, "The people who are going to try to steal from me are preparing to make contact. I want you to explain to me what the precise legal consequence is if I allow this contact to occur in a documented way versus if I cut it off now." Rahul was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "If they've already committed an actionable act, cutting it off now only benefits them. It removes the evidence of intent and pattern. If you document the contact, document every step of what they present to you or what they attempt to extract. Document the timeline against what you've already filed, and if they subsequently go out and file something that overlaps, you have not just a claim, you have a narrative." She said, "How airtight does the documentation need to be?" He said, "I want dates, times, names, meeting locations, the specific questions they asked and the specific answers you gave. And I want a contemporaneous record made within 24 hours of every interaction. I also want you to contact me before any meeting that you believe is an attempt at extraction, so that I can advise you on what to reveal and what to withhold." She said, "Done." He said, "One more thing. I want a copy of everything in an escrow account I control, dated and sealed, so that if they challenge the timestamps of your records, there's a third-party custodian." She said, "How much is the escrow service?" He said, $350 a year, non-negotiable. She said, "Fine." She met with Preston Mail of Sonata Ventures on a Thursday afternoon in September. Cassidy had arranged the meeting through Derek, who had arranged it through a chain of 2 intermediaries in a way that was designed to make the arrangement look organic. Elena recognized the arrangement for what it was and attended the meeting with the calm of someone who already knows which cards are on the table and which are up the sleeve. Preston Mayle was 61, which surprised her. He had been 53 in her first life, which meant this timeline was running 8 years ahead of the encounter she remembered. She adjusted. And he was still the same type. The practiced ease of someone who had built something and was now in the business of evaluating other people's attempts to build something, which gave him a particular quality of amused patience that he used to make the people across from him feel observed. He asked good questions. He had done some research on audiograph, which told her he had been briefed. He was looking for specific answers. She gave him answers that were accurate and complete and did not include the proprietary architecture. She was warm and precise, and she let him see exactly as much as she wanted him to see, which was a founder who knew what she had, knew what it was worth, and was not in a hurry. Near the end of the meeting, he asked the question, not the one she had read in the deposition transcript. That was from her first life, from a meeting that had not involved her. He asked a different question, which was, have you considered taking on technical partners? Someone who might help you build out the commercial side? Elena looked at him with the expression of someone genuinely considering the question. I'm very careful about the IP structure at this stage, she said. Any partnership arrangement would need to clearly preserve the original authorship documentation. I've had some approaches from people who didn't fully understand that boundary. Preston nodded. As the quality of the nod told her something. Of course, he said. That's good practice. She updated the log that evening. She sent a summary to Rahul. She sent a copy to the escrow account. She waited. 4 months later, James Osai sent her a quarterly report that included a flag. A new entity called Resonance Analytics, LLC, had been incorporated in the state 2 weeks prior. The registered incorporators were Cassidy Holt and Derek Naum. They're the stated business purpose: proprietary streaming data analytics and recommendation technology. The company had made a preliminary filing with the Patent Office, a provisional application which established a date without fully describing the technology, which gave them 12 months to file the full application. The provisional did not contain enough technical detail to evaluate the overlap with Audiograph's protected methodology. But the date was 6 weeks after the last meeting Cassidy had attended as an Audiograph communications advisor. Elena read the report on a Saturday morning with her second coffee, standing at the kitchen counter in her apartment. Her own apartment, not her childhood bedroom, which she had moved into 14 months ago once the consulting income had stabilized. The apartment was in a building that had been constructed in the 1960s and had not been renovated since, with plaster walls that were slightly uneven and a radiator that knocked twice at 3 a.m. with the regularity of a schedule. She had lived there for 14 months, and she had not gotten around to unpacking the last 2 boxes of books that sat against the bedroom wall because there was always something more pressing. She put the coffee down. She called Rahul. It was Saturday, and he did not generally take calls on Saturday, but she had included in their fee agreement a provision for exactly this type of contact, and she paid the corresponding retainer. He picked up on the 3rd ring. She said, "They've incorporated." He was quiet for a moment. She could hear, in the background, the sound of a television being muted. Then he said, "Send me the report." She sent it. She heard the sound of him reading. Then he said, "Provisional filing 6 weeks after Cassidy Holt's last work product for Audiograph was submitted." "Yes." "And you have the contemporaneous records from all the meetings with Derek Naum and the Sonata Ventures meeting?" "All in the escrow account." "And the Spotify documentation?" "Everything. Timestamped, backed up, third-party reviewed." He was quiet for a longer moment this time. She waited. This was a form of patience she had learned in her first life. The patience of letting a professional think, rather than filling the silence with the anxiety of needing to know the answer. He said, "I want to do something before we file anything. I want to send a letter." "To who?" "To Cassidy Holt and Derek Naum, at their registered Resonance Analytics address. A formal notice letter. Attorney to attorney would be cleaner, but we can't wait for them to retain counsel." The letter states the following: that Elena Voss, founder of Audiograph LLC, has been made aware of the recent incorporation of Resonance Analytics LLC, and that in light of the documented history of the named party's access to Audiograph's proprietary methodology, she is formally placing them on notice that any publication, commercialization, or filing relating to streaming analytics or behavioral recommendation technology will be subject to IEP dispute proceedings under specific statute, and that all records relating to the development of Resonance Analytics stated technology are to be preserved as of the date of receipt of this letter. Elena said nothing for a moment. Then, what does that do? It creates a legal obligation to preserve evidence before they've had time to sanitize it. If they've been communicating about the theft, in text, in email, in Slack, anywhere digital, they are now under a preservation obligation. If they delete anything after receiving this letter, that deletion is spoliation. Spoliation is an independent cause of action in civil proceedings, and in some circumstances creates a presumption that the deleted material was adverse to their position. She felt something move through her that was not quite satisfaction, and not quite something else. "Send it," she said. "I'll have it out Monday." She ended the call. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the uneven plaster wall. Then she picked up her coffee and went to the bedroom and looked at the 2 boxes of books she had never unpacked and decided that today was the day. The letter arrived at Resonance Analytics' registered address, which was also Cassidy Holt's apartment, on a Wednesday. Elena knew it had arrived because Cassidy's response came on Thursday morning, a text to Elena's personal phone, the first direct communication in 6 weeks, that said, "Hey, can we talk? I'm a bit confused about something." Elena read the text. She forwarded it to Rahul with a note. They received it. He replied, "Don't engage personally. I'll reach out to their counsel if they have any. If not, direct them to me." She replied to Cassidy, "Sure. Rahul Singh is handling any Audiograph business matters. Here's his contact." She pasted Rahul's email and direct line. Cassidy did not contact Rahul. She called Derek instead, which Elena knew because Derek called Elena 40 minutes after Cassidy's text, using the number he had called her on during the investment meetings, which she still had on her phone, and said in a voice that was working very hard to be calm. "Hey, Elena, I think there's been some kind of miscommunication about," she said. "Derek, anything relating to IP matters involving Audiograph needs to go to my attorney. I'll send you his contact. I just think if we talked, his contact is Rahul Singh." She gave the number and ended the call. Beto, she called Rahul and told him to expect contact. He said he already had. Cassidy had emailed him 20 minutes ago. She had not retained counsel. She had written the email herself, which Rahul described as not ideal for her interests. The email had claimed that Resonance Analytics technology was independently developed, that Cassidy had never had access to any proprietary algorithm, that the advisory agreement clearly defined her role as communications only, and that the letter constituted harassment. Rahul had read the email with the attention it deserved and said he would respond formally within 3 business days. He would request, in the response, a full accounting of Resonance Analytics development history, including dates, contributors, and the technical documentation of its algorithm's development from inception. He would also note, in the response, that the Spotify Family Plan usage records and the associated platform integrity documentation had been preserved and were available as evidence of the testing activity conducted on Audiograph's algorithm using a shared account without authorization, constituting both a terms of service violation and, potentially, unauthorized access to a proprietary system under applicable computer fraud statutes. This was the piece Cassidy had not thought about. This was the piece she could not explain away. Because the Spotify logs were not Elena's records. They were Spotify's records. The platform integrity team's preserved logs. The documentation that James Osei had reviewed and which Dr. Suin Park had provided a technical analysis of. Evidence that did not originate with Elena, that Elena had not created, that sat in a server farm somewhere, and had a chain of custody that did not pass through Elena's hands. Cassidy had borrowed a resource. She had used it for something she believed was invisible. She had not considered that the platform was watching. She had not considered that the account holder could see the dashboard. She had not considered that someone had documented everything she did with the access she had been given, every session, every timestamp, every mechanical skip. She had not considered any of this because she had assumed that generosity was uncomplicated. She had assumed that when someone gave you something freely, yes, it was given without conditions. She had assumed that Elena was the same person she had always appeared to be. Preston Mail of Sonata Ventures received his own letter 2 weeks later. It was a different kind of letter, more precise, more focused on the question of what Sonata had known and when. It attached the transcript of the meeting in September and pointed to the specific exchange about technical partners and IP structure, and it noted that any due diligence conducted by Sonata in relation to resonance analytics would need to account for the documented prior art and the timeline of Cassidy Holt's access to that prior art. It did not threaten. It informed. Rahul had explained the distinction. A threat puts the other party on the defensive and gives them a clear target to fight. An informational letter creates a problem they have to solve themselves. Oh, because they now know that a problem exists and that you know it exists and that ignoring it is no longer a viable option. An informational letter to a sophisticated investor communicates something very specific, that the situation they have been presented with is more complicated than they were told, and that proceeding carries a legal and reputational risk they have not fully modeled. Preston Mail, Yod, who had not survived 25 years in venture capital without understanding the difference between a manageable complication and an existential one, made the correct assessment within 72 hours. Sonata Ventures withdrew from the resonance analytics funding conversation. The withdrawal notice used language about timing and strategic fit that said nothing and meant everything. Without Sonata, Cassidy and Derek were in a difficult position. They could look for other funding, which would mean presenting the same algorithm and encountering the same problem. The letter was now part of the record, and Rahul had filed copies with the appropriate IP bodies in a way that made it findable to any competent due diligence process. They could abandon resonance analytics and cut their losses. Or they could fight, which required legal resources they did not have, against a paper trail they could not credibly challenge. Assembled by someone who had had 8 months of warning before the first shot was fired, Cassidy called Elena one more time, 3 weeks after the Sonata withdrawal. It was a Sunday evening, and the call came while Elena was sitting at her desk, working through a licensing proposal from a mid-tier streaming service that had approached Audiograph through a legitimate channel, and she looked at the screen and saw Cassidy's name and sat with it for 2 full rings before she answered. Elena? Cassidy's voice had lost the performed warmth. What was underneath was something Elena had seen glimpses of before. A hard, practical core that didn't waste energy on surfaces when the surfaces were no longer useful. Cassidy? I don't understand what you think you're doing. Elena said nothing. I signed that agreement. I know what I signed. You know I contributed to this. You know how much of the early development happened in conversations between us. The advisory agreement defines your contributions, Elena said. My attorney drafted it. You signed it. If you have a dispute with its terms, that conversation goes through him. Elena, I'm not talking about a legal dispute. I'm talking about the fact that we've known each other for 5 years and you're sending letters to my investors. I'm protecting my IP? Because that's a standard business action. You're trying to destroy what Derek and I are building. I'm trying to establish that what Derek and you are building has a provenance problem. A pause. Then, the Spotify thing is not what you're making it out to be. Elena felt something that was not surprise, more like the satisfaction of a hypothesis confirmed. She kept her voice level. I haven't made it out to be anything. And I've documented it and made it available to the relevant parties. I was testing a concept. It was a general concept, not your specific. That's an interesting characterization of running automated sequential listening sessions at 2 a.m. on a skip pattern that Dr. Suyin Park has documented as consistent with behavioral fingerprinting algorithm validation. The silence on the line was not brief. It was the silence of someone recalibrating. Then Cassidy said, quietly, You planned this. Elena said nothing. You knew what I was doing, and you let me do it on your account, because you wanted the documentation. Elena said, Rahul Singh is the appropriate contact for any further communication on Audiograph matters. I'll send you the email again. She ended the call. She put the phone face down on the desk. She looked at the licensing proposal open on her laptop, the numbers laid out in a table that Rahul had formatted correctly. Unknown the terms that were fair and verifiable and attached to work that was documented and protected and entirely her own. She scrolled to the signature line. She picked up a pen. The licensing deal closed 6 weeks later. By then, Resonance Analytics had gone quiet. No further patent filings, no social media announcements, no industry activity of any kind. Derek had returned to his previous work in tech investment, though with one firm less on his contact list. Because Sonata Ventures had a long memory for situations that had cost them time. Cassidy had deleted her audiograph advisory materials from her LinkedIn profile, which created a brief gap in her career timeline that anyone paying attention would find interesting. James Osei filed his next quarterly report and noted that no algorithm matching Audiograph's methodology had appeared in any public filing or commercial release in the monitored period. He noted this without comment, which was the correct professional response to the absence of a threat that had been successfully neutralized before it could materialize. Elena read the report in the kitchen of the apartment that still had the uneven plaster walls, drinking coffee from the mug that had a small chip in the handle she had been meaning to deal with for months. She had, in the 6 weeks since the licensing deal closed, unpacked the 2 boxes of books. They were on the shelf now, organized loosely by subject, and in the shelf was the first thing in the apartment that looked deliberately inhabited rather than transitionally occupied. She put the report in the folder with all the others. The music streaming service that had licensed Audiograph's algorithm was based in Stockholm, and the day Elena flew out to finalize the partnership details, she sat in the back of the car from the airport and watched the city come into view. Pale winter light, architecture that took the cold seriously. The specific quality of European urban space that feels designed for the weather rather than in spite of it. The driver had the radio on. Something she didn't recognize. Something in Swedish, with a tempo that the algorithm would have identified as 72 beats per minute, and paired, in her own profile, with the combination of relief and residual alertness she felt after solving a problem. She thought about Cassidy. Us not with anger. That had completed itself somewhere around the 4th quarterly report and left behind something that had the texture of a closed case. She thought about her the way you think about a technical problem you have resolved, with a dispassionate appreciation for the complexity of it and a mild satisfaction that the solution had been elegant. She thought about the rain on the copper drainpipe and the fraying cable and the not quite right weight of the duvet and the water stain in the shape of a wing or a boot, depending on your mood. She thought about the Spotify dashboard with Cassidy's session running at 2:47 a.m., 47 songs, 45 to 60 seconds each, sequentially, mechanically, trying to look like a person and failing in exactly the way Dr. Park had predicted. She thought about the fact that Cassidy had borrowed the account without a second thought, without reading the terms of service, without wondering what the access logs revealed, without considering that the person who gave her the seat at the table had already decided what the seat was for. She thought, that is the difference between a communicator and an architect. A communicator builds the surface. An architect builds what the surface stands on. The car pulled up to the hotel. The driver got out and opened the door, and the cold came in, clean and direct and entirely without apology. And Elena stepped out onto the pavement with her bag on her shoulder and her phone in her hand, and the folder of documents in her briefcase that contained 3 years of careful preparation and not a single word she could not prove. She walked through the hotel door. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. She checked the screen. It was a notification from Spotify, a new playlist recommendation based on her recent listening. The algorithm, her algorithm, most the one that had cost her everything once and now owed her nothing, had suggested 17 songs, sequenced by tempo and emotional register, and the specific correlation between ambient sound tolerance and emotional state that she had spent 8 months building and testing on herself in a university apartment with a dripping tap and cheap coffee, and the absolute conviction that she was building something that had value. She was right. It had value. She put the phone back in her pocket and went to check in. Across the lobby, a young woman at the concierge desk was playing music through a small speaker. Something quiet and precise, with a piano line that moved like a careful argument. The sound hit the marble and the glass and the high ceiling and arrived at Elena soft and dispersed, and she stopped for a moment and listened without knowing she was going to, and the algorithm in her chest, the human one, oh, not the proprietary one, identified the track's tempo and its register and suggested the correct emotional response. She did not feel it. She gave the desk her name and handed over her passport, and the woman behind the counter looked at it and then at her and said, "Welcome, Ms. Voss." Elena said, "Thank you." She took the key card. She walked to the elevator. The doors opened immediately, as if they had been waiting. And she stepped in and pressed the number for her floor, and the doors closed, and she was alone in the mirrored box of it, watching her own face look back at her the way faces look when no one else is watching. And she thought about nothing in particular for 12 seconds while the elevator climbed. On her floor, the hallway smelled of a cleaning product that had a faint cedar note and of the recycled air that all hotel hallways smell of, which is the smell of impermanence done at scale. She walked to her door and held the keycard against the sensor and waited for the green light. It blinked red. She held the card against the sensor again, repositioned it slightly, held it flat, green. The door opened. The room was dark except for the gray light coming through the curtains, and she found the light switch and the room came up, plain, functional, well-designed in the manner of Scandinavian hospitality, which is to say designed to make you forget you are paying for it. The bed was large and the window looked over a canal, and there was a desk in the corner with a chair that had the correct ergonomics for working, which she noted approvingly. She put her bag on the bed. She put her briefcase on the desk. She sat in the chair with the correct ergonomics and opened her laptop and found the licensing document and the signature page she had been reviewing on the flight. All the terms that were fair and specific and attached to a methodology that had a paper trail clear enough to use as a blueprint. She read the terms once more. She did not find anything she hadn't already found. She picked up the pen she kept clipped to the inside of the briefcase's front pocket, the one she had been using since the consulting firm days. A basic ballpoint that cost nothing and had been refilled twice, and wrote with the particular even pressure of a pen you have used long enough to know. She turned to the signature line. The cursor blinked on the screen. Outside, the canal was dark and flat, and the lights of the city were beginning to come on, one by one, indifferently. She signed.